Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on historic preservation with the Town of Clarkdale. My name is Steve Russell. I'm the program manager of the ASU Project Cities program. We're a program of the Sustainable Cities Network at ASU's Global Futures Laboratory. We are pleased to have you with us today for a webinar and video series that we're just getting off the ground. Since starting the program in 2017, we've facilitated 49 class projects with 28 different schools and programs across the university. This diversity of academic disciplines and thought is important because municipal sustainability challenges and historic preservation challenges like this are best handled through that sort of multidisciplinary approach. By convening together today with multiple projects on one line, we are hoping to build better bridges and collaboration between students. And our hope is that we walk away today, everyone with a better idea of the complexity of this challenge and how your various perspectives can contribute to this bigger picture effort. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists and colleagues for joining us today. Panelists, if you don't mind flipping on your video, I'm going to introduce y'all real quickly. We are joined by Councilmember Bill Regner from the Town of Clarkdale. Been on the council since 2010. Councilmember Regner has been wonderful to work with, helping to keep our students informed on the historic character of Clarkdale and how they can incorporate that work. We are also joined by Michael Linder, who is with the Clarkdale Historic Society. And we are also joined by Ruth Mayday. Ruth Mayday is a Community Development Director with Community Development Services with the Town of Clarkdale. And we are joined by Lauren Alsop with ASU, a sustainability scientist with the Global Institute of Sustainability and professor of the School of Geographic Sciences and Urban Planning, faculty associate. We have some other folks I'd like to recognize on the line as well. We're joined by Mike Gray. He is a planning manager with the development services as well. We are joined by my colleagues, Ann Richmond, who is our program director, and Lindsay Sikorsky, one of our program assistants. And we are also joined today by Tracy Levinka, the town manager of the Town of Clarkdale. Thank you everyone for joining us. And to get us started today, we were going to start off with the video from the Historic Society. So let me get that on for y'all. All right, here we go.
To the museum, where we preserve and display the history of Clarkdale. This is one of a series of multimedia presentations that will take you beyond the visiting public's view. When you have left this presentation, please visit our website to learn more. Once there, you will have the opportunity to support our mission by becoming a member of the Clarkdale Historical Society and Museum. Please enjoy this presentation. This is a story of the very beginnings of Clarkdale, and it will be illustrated with photos from the collection of the Clarkdale Historical Society and Museum. The year was 1910, and copper magnate William Andrews Clark was still enjoying profits from his United Verde Copper Company smelter and mine in Jerome. But he was looking to make some improvements. Parts of the mine had been suffering underground fires for many years, caused by the combustion of highly flammable particles of sulfur dust created in the mining process. If the Jerome smelter were removed, it would allow the mine to be converted to an open pit, enabling crews to finally extinguish the fires, as well as providing access to additional copper ore located below the smelter. Clark also had concerns about the town of Jerome itself. It had sprouted on a hillside in the late 1800s to support 2 copper mines and their workers, but it had become a crowded and unevenly developed town that suffered from occasional landslides and devastating fires. Clark began a search for a location and possible town site in 1910. He set out to fulfill his ambition to create a town, a master planned community that would be one of the most modern of its time. He eventually located a relatively flat parcel of land in the valley just below Jerome and near a water source, the Verde River. Clark proceeded to acquire land nearby, where some members of the Yavapai and Tonto Apache tribes lived in temporary settlements along the Verde River. The tribes had originally lived in the Verde Valley long before the appearance of white settlers, but they were forcibly removed from the area in 1875 by the U.S. government. When small numbers of tribe members returned in about 1900, they had few resources and no property rights. Once Clark obtained the land where he intended to build his town and smelter, the native people did their best to survive outside the town borders. Some of the men would eventually work in the smelter, and the children would attend what was known as an all-Indian school in the town. Clark and his advisors began by inspecting the farms and ranches along the east bank of the Verde River, which were already established. In 1911 and 1912, he bought land and water rights from W. A. Jordan, who had been farming in the area since 1880. Jordan would remain on the land and continue to supply produce to Jerome, Clarkdale, and other Verde Valley towns until the environmental conditions deteriorated due to smelter operations. By 1913, Clark's United Verde Copper Company controlled 1,200 acres of land, which included the town site on the west bank of the Verde River and the farmland on the east bank. Clark intended to create a company town that would be unmatched anywhere in the world. Unlike the fire-prone wooden buildings of Jerome, the new town would have homes built from bricks using a good source of clay on the banks of the Verde River. The new town would have plenty of room for neatly arranged houses, open park space, and a centralized business district. Clark's plan for his community clearly followed the principles of the City Beautiful movement, conceived at the turn of the 20th century. This concept held the belief that beauty, order, and a well-planned and well-constructed town created an environment which influenced human thought and behavior in a positive way. Elements of a city beautiful included open spaces, parks, up-to-date facilities, neat, clean dwellings with aesthetically pleasing streets and sidewalks with streetlights. Clark hoped this town would attract a more reliable and consistent worker than other transient mining towns. The master plan for the community not only encompassed the smelter and the residential areas, but the full range of infrastructure to supply all the needs of Clark's smelter employees. Work started on the business district in 1914, and it slowly progressed to fill the downtown block of Main Street in Clarkdale. One of the first businesses was the T.F. Miller Mercantile Store, owned and operated by the brother-in-law of Williams Clark. The Shot Cafe and Bakery occupied the north side of Main Street. Clarkdale residents could easily reach downtown by foot, by horse, or by that novelty known as the automobile. Those wishing to travel to other cities could use the newly built Santa Fe train station, which served trains using the new railroad that Clark had built through the Verde River Canyon to connect to established rail lines in the Prescott area. Other facilities built for Clarkdale residents were a public school built in 1915 and a post office completed in 1918. At the same time, further west on Main Street, a beautiful town park was started in 1915. Although the town was designed specifically to support the copper smelter, It was a fairly nice place for the workers to live. Compared to other rural towns, Clarkdale was full of brand new houses and businesses, made exceptionally modern with plumbing and electricity fully installed. After almost 2 decades and $1 million of William Andrew Clark's money, his master plan of an orderly and productive mining town was fulfilled. Thus, Clarkdale was born.
All right. Oops. Well, I want to thank the Clarkdale Historic Society and the Clarkdale Museum for providing that video for our viewing today. As our students who are working with the town of Clarkdale are certainly starting to figure out, this is a really unique community and has a really special history to it. As the first master planned community in Arizona, it's a really unique case study. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to the Clarkdale team to give us an overview of some of the historic preservation efforts in the community and some of their perspectives. Councilmember Regner?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. And thank you to the Project Cities program, the ASU. Thank you, Dr. Alsop, for being here with us today and contributing. And to the ASU students that are in attendance here, we really appreciate your involvement in here. We have had some just wonderful collaborations with the Project Cities programs. We are utilizing the work that has been done in our planning for the future of Clarkdale, and we just find it so beneficial and useful information to have. So we appreciate the collaborations, and we appreciate this opportunity to be with you today. When we talk about historic preservation in Clarkdale, I think I want to recap just a little bit of what the video talked about. When you talk about a master plan community in a quintessential company town, perhaps you remember or familiar with a song made famous by Tennessee Ernie Ford that went something like, "You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me because I can't go. I owe my soul to the company's store." That's a company town. The town owned all the industrial buildings, of course. They owned the commercial buildings, administrative buildings, or recreational buildings, educational buildings. They owned everything. And when you bought your groceries, you bought them on credit at the grocery store. When you went to the mercantile to buy your dry goods, you bought it there. Went to the theater, the bowling alley, all the amenities that were there. You had accounts, and on payday, you got your check and you went and you settled all your accounts. This was a company store. Everything was dependent on this economic generator that sat over next to it, a little bit below it, called the smelter. And so this Clarkdale as a community thrived. It was the economic center of the Verde Valley during that time, and a good life for those people, even with the smelter smoke that was ever present. A big thing happened in 1953, and that was the closing of the smelter. And the loss of the economic generator that allowed all this to happen. And it caused a deep depression economic depression within the area. People moved because there were no jobs. Houses became vacant. Buildings, that held the stores and things like that were not doing the same kind of business that they were able to do in the past. And so retail began to shrink and move to other places. And so Clarkdale became not a total ghost town, but a semi-ghost town where we had a lot of the structures empty. A lot of the houses that stood for a long time without being occupied, the roofs began to have trouble. Some of the water would get in and do damage to the flooring and things like that. And it's actually a testament to how well they were built, that they were able to be restored over time. But in that, when we talk about historic preservation, when that happened, there was a kind of an interruption in the sense of who the town was, what the town was, and our understanding of the importance of the uniqueness of Clarkdale, because it was a very, very difficult time, and the houses were inexpensive. People could picked them up pretty quickly. And so historic preservation kind of became not so important, and the appreciation of of what this comprehensive integrated community was not a high priority. And we have come to kind of see that Clarkdale, where we have loved and appreciated our history, we haven't really embraced it in a way that might give it its due as really the most underutilized asset we have in Clarkdale, our story. We have a story to tell. We're the first master plan community in Arizona. We're the quintessential company town. This is a story that we have that we are in danger of losing, not only from over time, because the buildings are over 100 years old, but the changes and modifications that have happened over time, and what could happen now to the historic buildings. Some of you may have been to Clarkdale. You would know that some of our commercial buildings in the downtown are standing vacant. And Mike Linder is going to talk to you in a minute about what we have been doing and some things that are happening. But this is a town that had this wonderful, thriving purpose and identity that lost it very quickly because it was so dependent on one thing, one economic generator. So our task now is to begin to figure out, how do we replace that, and how do we build this critical mass of economic activity within the town so that people see a potential entrepreneur comes into town and sees this empty building there and sees all these people walking around looking for ways to spend their money that are not available to them, and they go, here's an opportunity. There's a building there, and I could put something in there and I could sell something to them. However, these buildings that have been vacant a long time. One major one in the downtown, over 30 years it's been vacant. And so there's a lot of resources that needs to go into restoring it, even to a point of being able to occupy it. And so we have tremendous challenges at Clarkdale with economic development. What we are focusing now, and this is what we're here to talk to you about today, about some of those efforts, and in particular a bridge, which actually we are discovering is much more important and much more iconic to Clarkdale than we really considered before. So thank you for being here, and thank you for learning the story of Clarkdale and learning about what we have and what we're bringing, what we're trying to do. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Lindner, who is on our Historic Preservation Committee. He is the president of our Historical Society and Museum, and he is very knowledgeable about historic preservation and the town of Clarkdale. So Mike, it's to you.
Thank you, Bill, and welcome everybody. I'm going to provide you with an overview of the preservation efforts in Clarkdale, and also give you a sampling of our historic structures and some of the preservation efforts that we've been able to accomplish to date. So the historic town was built between the years of 1913 and 1930, and as a result, a high percentage of all those historic structures remain largely intact today. Grouping of our residents and a Jerome historian took the initiative in 1998 to initiate the listing of the Clarkdale Historic District on the National Register of Historic Places. So the district includes both the upper and lower town residential areas, the town municipal complex, which includes this Clark Memorial Clubhouse photo that you see below, and also the downtown business district. The Clarkdale Historical Society and Museum was established in the early 2000s, and after about a decade of existence, they decided to revisit its strategic plan. And so using Dr. Marshall Whitmire as a consultant, we revisited the plan to look to the future of preservation in Clarkdale and what it really meant to the community. And there was several elements that we felt were very important. One of them was public programs in addition to preservation activities, and also tying our missions to the economic development of Clarkdale. As Bill said, there's several empty buildings in our downtown business district that have been vacant for decades, and there is a direct tie to economic development and historic preservation. And all of this leads to a sense of community and quality of life for the citizens of Clarkdale. This theme is further reflected in our vision statement. We go back and we acknowledge what Bill said. Clarkdale was Arizona's first master plan community. Everything from streets, sewers, electricity, telephones, all those types of things were planned into the master plan. And so part of the vision statement recognizes that, celebrates that, and ties it to economic development and quality of life. Finally, we set several priority goals, number 7 of which was to develop a program that supports the preservation and renovation of Clarkdale's built environment, including the development and submission of applications to the National Register of Historic Places. So with the establishment recently, in fact, just a couple of months ago, by the Town of Clarkdale of a Historic Preservation Commission, we've largely accomplished that goal. There's a lot of work to do to move forward. So I'm going to let Ruth Mayday, if she's joined the line, talk a little bit more about the Historic Preservation Commission and the other activities that the Town of Clarkdale has been undertaking.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for that, Michael. Yeah, so the Town of Clarkdale has been working diligently to get the Historic Preservation Committee up and running. And as Michael mentioned, that commission was appointed at the end of July, and we have adopted an ordinance along with that. Right now, we're in the process of getting the resumes, which for all of the commissioners approved by the State Historical Preservation Office. Unlike most commissions, it can be just about anybody. For this specific, for the Historic Preservation Organization, we're required to have commissioners with specific experience in historic preservation or architecture and so forth. We're very fortunate in Clarkdale that we have a number of people with that background and those interests that we were able to select some highly qualified members. Once those are approved, we can then move forward with the certified local government status application. The benefit to that for the town, of course, is that we are now eligible to apply for several historic preservation grants through the National Trust and the Department of Interior. So that is where we are right now with Historic Preservation Commission, and we will be holding our first meeting shortly.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm going to go through several of our historic structures. What you're seeing on the screen now is our most recent edition of adaptive reuse, and one that we're very proud of to have in the Town of Clarkdale. This corner building took several years to complete, from the inception of the vision to the final opening earlier this spring of the upper level as a boutique hotel, and the lower level as what is now known as the Smeltertown Brewery, which just opened up in early September. You can see it's quite a handsome building. Its historic elements are largely intact. The biggest difference that you can tell is you can see that the upper level windows have been replaced. The ones that were there were completely beyond repair. The other thing that you can see from this photo is the exterior brickwork. There's severe deterioration nearly on all exposures of the building, both near the top and then also down here near the bottom. I don't know if you can see the cursor, that type of thing. So this next slide further illustrates that is a comparison of what the structure looked like in around 1916 to today. You can see this upper course of brick, about 2 to 3 feet, has been lost. That section was removed in the early 70s because it was unstable. And why was it unstable? It's because the structures in Clarkdale, the brick structures, were built with unfired brick that was made in Clarkdale right near the Verde River. So one of the needs that we certainly could use some help with is advice and instructions on how to stabilize and restore the masonry structures of our buildings, both the homes and the commercial structures. Some other examples of adaptive reuse are the Clarkdale Copper Art Museum up here in the upper left. That is a very nice museum showcasing copper objects from all over the world. And that's housed in the 1928 former Clarkdale High School building. And it's a very, very popular tourist attraction and very much worth seeing, not only for the contents of the copper objects inside, but just the preservation of the structure itself is incredible. Moving down right below, you might recognize this as the post office building that was mentioned in the video. In the early 90s, this was no longer the post office, and the town of Clarkdale took that over as part of the municipal complex. And it now houses the utilities offices, the town engineer, and the economic development offices. So it's a town building now. Towards the middle, you can see the yellow schoolhouse has been converted to basically luxury suites Airbnb rooms, very large, very spacious. The exterior remains intact. Down here in the lower left is a former bank building that was converted to a very high-end wine tasting cooperative. Unfortunately, it didn't survive due to the economic conditions in downtown Clarkdale. It moved up to Jerome where there's more traffic, but it's now being used as a real estate investment office. So you can see the interior contains the original bank partitions and furnishings, and the vault is there. So it's a very good example of adaptive reuse while retaining historical elements. In the upper right is a former dormitory that was built around 1919 for single males who worked at the mine. They called it the dormitory. And within about the last 5 years, that's been renovated and converted to Airbnb types of suites. And what's particularly notable about this structure here is that in the 60s and 70s, several of the original windows had been removed and covered with plywood to accommodate evaporative coolers and those types of things. So the owner recently restored the doors and windows to the original appearance. So it makes a very nice building. And then finally, in the lower right-hand side is a former drugstore retail building that was really just a large shell, which was converted to offices. So these are all examples of adaptive reuse that have been implemented, within about the last 20, 25 years. We only have a couple of examples of true restorations, the first of which is still actually a work in process. It's the 1927 Clark Memorial Clubhouse that was built as a result of the money that Clark left in his will for the Town of Clarkdale employees that made him a very rich individual. And it's very, very nice, very, very ornate. But during the 50s and 60s, it was neglected very badly. In the early 80s, Historic Commission was formed by town residents to begin the restoration of the clubhouse. The restoration included basically a complete rebuilding of the interior of the auditorium because it was so heavily damaged and vandalized, replacement of the roof tiles, refinishing of floors, and those types of things. Those restoration efforts continue to this day, and most recently, the town updated all of the restrooms to meet ADA compliant requirements. And they did so while retaining historical elements, and you can hardly tell that those additions have been made until you actually walk inside the restroom. So that's very nice. And then finally, on the lower right is the town bandstand from our public park. So this structure was originally built in the around 1915, 1916. It was moved once within the park, and it was not built on a foundation. So in the 1990s, it started to lean dramatically because the wooden support started to deteriorate. And the town, after going through a lot of deliberations, decided to restore the structure. And they did so, basically with the original elements intact. Something that you can't quite see that they had to do was to raise the height of the railings and those types of things to meet modern building codes. But the structure looks exactly like it did when it was built.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, Sean, I want to talk about the Clarkdale Bitter Creek Bridge, sometimes referred to as the Broadway Bridge. And this is a very interesting bridge. This is what we refer to as kind of a single lane bridge, although at the time it was built, the vehicles were much smaller and it was really a 2-lane bridge. And it's not the first bridge in this location. It was built in 1917 as the plaque displays, and it was built to replace a bridge that we don't know a lot about right now, but we will point it out to you in a picture in just a minute. But this bridge was, for me anyway, in the time I've been here, was kind of this impediment to getting into the old industrial area of Clarkdale. And as we are looking towards reestablishing economic development activities in that area, we saw it as, as a limiting factor, which is kind of what has brought us to pose this question to you. What can we do with this bridge to widen it and to make it more viable? But it's allowed us or caused us to focus now on the bridge and go down and pay more attention to what it was. And it's turning out to be this really remarkable icon of Clarkdale in a metaphor, in a sense, for Clarkdale. And that when we look at it, we're going, what was the purpose of this bridge originally? Because the supplies and the product of the smelter would have moved in and out on the rail, because there's a rail line spur that is in Clarkdale. And so this road wasn't used for that. What was it used for? And so the only kind of deducement you can make is that it was for getting people to and from work, from the town, the residential areas of Clarkdale and the commercial areas of Clarkdale. And so why would you build a bridge like this for that purpose? And then when you begin to understand, and you can see from the video who William Andrews Clark was, and when he built something, he built it to last. Everything he built was a statement. And so this says a lot. This is kind of why this is an icon now, or for me, more so of what Clarkdale is. And he built this bridge so solidly that it is now in the National Register of Historic Places. And Steve has a couple documents that I shared with him that I think he will share with you, that this bridge, is a remarkable example of the kind of bridge that was made at that time, although it actually has additional elements to it that most bridges didn't have. So I want to read to you really quickly what is written in this one of these documents, this National Register of Historic Places. So here's the bridge, and you can see this is how narrow it is, and this is the smelter area in the background, and you're coming from the residential and commercial areas of Clarkdale. The Broadway Bridge displays unadventurous span, and you can also see behind me, and the background on my picture, another view of the bridge. The Broadway Bridge displays unadventurous span and total lengths, but is nevertheless technologically significant as the earliest intact example in Arizona of this fundamental bridge design. It is further distinguished by the architectural treatment of its approaches, a rare commodity among the state's starkly engineered concrete spans, one of the few privately constructed roadway spans in Arizona. The Broadway Bridge is an important early remnant. Okay, this is another view. This is a diagram of, or a map of Clarkdale. You can see the red mark there where the bridge is located. There are residential areas here. There's the area of the administrative buildings, Upper and Lower Clarkdale, and at the top of the picture is the smelter site. Okay, also in the text of this document, so, and it was, again, built in 1917. It was designed by the United Verde Copper Company's engineering department. It was designed in-house, built by contractors Fleming and Stitzer, which I think we'll probably try to learn more about. But the bridge featured handsomely articulated concrete detailing. Now you have one of the blueprints, and we have this remarkable inventory of blueprints from every building in the town from the original design, the original master planning. A remarkable treasure that we have been able to preserve and make available to people like yourselves, students like yourselves, studying this type of historical structure. Parapet walls, decoratively, this is again from the text, decoratively formed parapet walls, bulkheads and light standards, and bulkheads which supported light standards on each end. Here are drawings of the light fixtures. Span and total length. Displays unadventurous span and total length. Unadventurous span. So there were 5 different spans with a skew of 30 degrees, and that I believe is the angle. You can see where the water would flow underneath. I believe that's what the 30-degree skew is. Dr. Alsop perhaps can clarify that. Main span length was 27 feet, structure length of 130 feet, roadway width of 18 feet, the entire structure width of 21.3 feet. Another diagram. Another diagram. Architectural treatments of its approaches. It is further distinguished by the architectural treatment of its approaches, a rare commodity among the state's starkly engineered concrete span. So here you can see, and Mike has got the pointer there, that is the position, the site of the original bridge. This is looking down from the administrative complex, the clubhouse, looking down. This is the road, entry into the industrial area. This is while the smelter is being built, and you will see in the next slide, we have one of the smokestacks up. Eventually there will be 2. So this is this incredibly, overbuilt in a way structure, and an ornately designed for its time structure that is a statement by William Andrews Clark about who he was and what he wanted Clarkdale to be. And so it's unique enough to gain the attention of this survey and be one of only like 110, I think there's 110 automobile bridges in the state, and I think there was only 175 in the entire survey. So it was remarkable enough to make that survey, and something that we are now appreciating much more greatly in the town of Clarkdale as we look to now expand it, develop it further to allow us to, further open up this old industrial area that now needs transportation, methods of transportation or avenues of transportation in and out of that area. So it's a very important structure, more important now, perhaps maybe than it was then, as far as the development of that area economically. Okay, so we can do a question and answer, Steve, now, or we can wait till after Dr. Alsop.
You know what I'll do is I'll encourage the students to write your questions down so you don't forget them. But awesome. We'll come back for Q&A. I want to pivot over to Dr. Alsop. Thank you so much, Councilmember Regner, Michael, and the whole Historic Society, and all your team. Thank you for putting that information together for us. It was very informative. And I think especially our students working on this historic bridge project are going to be really grateful. We would love to get those design renderings too in front of them, or sorry, the architectural documents that you had. So thank you so much for putting that together. Dr. Alsop, I'd like to turn it over to you and let you take it away.
Well, thank you very much for the slides, because they were a lot more informative than what just generally you could find online. I did want to, because these were some of the things that I was going to talk about. You solved one of them. I did not see you as a certified local government, and I see you have that underway. So congratulations with that, because that, as you mentioned, will open up a lot of grants to you. Because one of the grants I was thinking of initially for the Broadway Bridge was if you haven't had a structural engineering analysis or report done, you might want to consider that, for example, as one of your grants. I also want to congratulate you on the retaining of the unfired brick buildings and just the overall respect and character that you're keeping in your neighborhood. It's often, adobe here in Arizona is often considered, oh, it's old, we don't want that. But Santa Fe, for example, has come to appreciate their adobe. And so similarly, your unfired brick is also part of what Clarkdale is. On that note, under chats, I did send a link that you might want to check out later. I had, my background is, my PhD, for example, my dissertation was on masonry and mortars. And when I was with the city of Mesa, I did a mortar analysis on the Niles Theater, which is a brick building in their downtown. That report, that website I sent, or that link, that can be used anywhere, and that might be of value to Clarkdale as well. You don't need a lab. I mean, I can answer questions later. That's using a lab, but there are ways that you can go out on site and understand some of the things. So the main thing that I initially wanted to talk about before we get to the bridge is the unfired brick and the masonry buildings. The key thing that most people that aren't in the field, they think that restoring a building, you just go to Home Depot and get some Portland cement and replace your mortar. And that's, for Clarkdale in particular, that's the worst thing you can do. It's, without getting too technical, you want to know what the PSI, or the pressure per square inch, is on a material. And you want to make sure your mortar is always less than the PSI of the masonry. And in this particular case, Portland cement is, last time I did an analysis of it, it was in the 300s PSI. And I know that unfired brick is probably going to be in the neighborhood of like 20. So you can imagine the strength that Portland cement is going to bring to a building like that. So please stay away on your unfired brick. The best thing you can do is hydrated lime. And I'm sure if you analyze your mortar, you'll find out that it's lime. And as long as you use lime, you're good. So on that note, moving to the bridge though, you do have, that's concrete. In some areas it's reinforced concrete. So that's a little bit different, but a red flag still goes up for me because of the age of the building. And I don't necessarily mean, oh, it's 100 years old. I meant, no, it's 1917. Portland cement first came in, and you have to have Portland cement to have concrete. Portland cement first came to this country in 1870. And that just means that it was first used here. That doesn't mean it was widespread available. And therefore, by the time turn of the century gave us the, wood building, okay. Turn of the century gave us the Portland Cement Association, but it also gave us several brick associations as well to learn and understand more about the materials. By the time those came around and concrete, for example, became more widespread use, there was the early forms of concrete used white cement. Edison, for example, in 1918, I believe it was, built some concrete houses in New Jersey, but those are white, and we need to, and they're all just like your bridge, they're in beautiful, condition. The two things that need to be considered is any repairs you do. Well, actually, there are three things to consider. The first one is anything you do, ask yourself, is it reversible? So if you put Portland cement on your mortar on your unfired brick buildings, is it reversible? No. When you try and take out that Portland cement, you will damage the bricks. So the second thing is we have to consider the PSI of white concrete. Today, we use gray concrete. And then the third thing is in making your repairs, you want to also consider what it's going to look like so you don't have these glaring repairs that sort of destroy the character of the building. So for the bridge, first of all, I'd consider an analysis of it just structurally. But second of all, in an and I can certainly help you with this, but in an unvisible area, for two reasons. One is so that it's not obvious, but also because it means that it's an area that's likely not been affected by sunlight and the temperatures and things like that. You want to take a sample and analyze it. And there's the mortar analysis link that I sent you. Probably it might work and it might not, because when you use muriatic acid on concrete, it sometimes doesn't work as well, but it's certainly worth a try. But it helps you understand the materials of which that bridge is comprised, or even if you want to move back to Main Street, those buildings, what they're comprised of. And then you can start making those decisions. So having just sort of generally given you some things to consider on repairing the bridge and things like that. And again, feel free to reach out for more specifics if you want. The key thing though is you want, as I understand it, you ideally would like bike lanes, sidewalks, and 2-car lanes. And the sort of problem that's arising is that to do that, if you alter the bridge in any way, and right now that bridge is on the National Register of Historic Places, as you know, and if you alter anything that would change, it's one thing for repairs and things, but if you alter the original character that you defined in that National Register, you will get kicked off, meaning that bridge will be removed from the National Register because you did what you did. There's no consequence like put it back or slap your hand, shame on you. You're just removed. And then it's going to be harder for you to get grants and things like that. And I say that because two things, if you are on the National Register for Historic Places, you are eligible for federal tax incentives, grants. For example, if you're a non-income producing structure inside, either on the National Register or inside a historic district, which means commercial buildings can't apply. But if it's a non-income producing structure, you can actually apply for a state tax reduction. Now, that may not apply to, say, a city building, but if like the buildings that residents live in within the historic district, if they're non-income producing structures, they can get their property taxes reduced. So there's things like this, and I understand that it's a little bit different when it's city owned. But the first thing that you have to consider is, do you want to be kicked off the National Register for that bridge? That said, there are thoughts, and Steve did tell me that the funds it's a little bit difficult right now for you to have funds to just build another bridge. And there might be some things that we can look at for that, because one of the initial things when I saw the width of the bridge and that it was on the register and some of the characteristics, its importance in the greater scheme of the master plan and just the town in general and what it means to all of that. What came to mind was turn the bridge into the bike lanes and the sidewalks, and then have a second bridge built with 2 lanes. And because I'm also concerned that if 18 feet isn't enough by code today to have 2 cars pass, my concern is if you suddenly start putting 2 cars, and say it's tight, but you can do it, but it hasn't been done, it wasn't intended that way when it was built. The problem is, will that additional weight, for example, not just 2 cars passing on the bridge, but what if there was a problem that forced a pileup of cars? And I don't mean an accident, I just meant something on either side of the road, on either side of the bridge, forced cars to slow down on the bridge. I'm concerned about the weight that's on that bridge, given that it was built in 1917. And yes, it is reinforced concrete. So it's not, don't think red flags are coming up here. It can certainly it was made for cars. We had cars when it was built. It's just these things that I'm looking at. So I hope it's not too negative in the sense of you're on the National Register, you could be removed if 2 lanes, the weight and everything, but it's certainly a very doable project to restore it and to match repairs and things like that. So some of, very quickly, because I'm watching the time, some of the recommendations that I also wanted to mention was there are, I noticed in some of the pictures that when the asphalt was placed on top of the road surface, that it looks like it allows water to go over by the parapet walls. And I just wonder about not that we have a lot of water in Arizona. In fact, that's why your unfired bricks do so well. But it's just, you want to not have any pooling water or anything that just adds to the weight. And on that note, there are things, for example, you can repair reinforced concrete with 100% plant-based epoxy in areas where it's needed, like near the reinforcements. There is a epoxy, 100% plant-based, made by Eco Safety Products, and it is actually used by ADOT. I know it's used in Phoenix, but ADOT is using it, so it's knowledgeable statewide. So I guess maybe at this point we open it up to questions, because I think it's long-term. I mean, I did some initial grant and funding research that might help, but it's not going to instantly give you the money to build a second bridge that can help you. So on that note, maybe we just have an exchange of comments and questions and things like that, and maybe we can brainstorm this.
Read my mind perfectly. Thank you. And thank you for that information, Dr. Alsop. You brought a lot of great technical content to this, so I appreciate that. There's a lot to discuss, right? But I would like to take this opportunity to turn over and ask our students if you have any questions for Dr. Alsop, Councilmember Regner, any of the other Peoria staff, or Michael from the Historic Society.
Can I add one comment?
Yeah.
I was just looking at my notes here. I said that white cement was probably used in making the bridge, including the concrete. And you can't get that at Home Depot, but do be aware that it is still around. Lehigh is a name brand for making that. You have, like I said, you can't go to Home Depot for it, but it's easy to obtain. So is hydraulic and hydrated lime. And again, I can help with that, but Lehigh, it's around.
Great, thank you for that. So I think our students must just be stretching their fingers right now, kind of getting ready for typing their questions or hitting that unmute button. While we wait for them, I guess I'll turn to Councilmember Regner. Any thoughts or reactions to what we just heard from Dr. Alsop here?
Well, only that we are thrilled to have somebody with that kind of knowledge and understanding available to us. Totally understand the point about pointing and replacing mortar joints, a process called pointing, I believe. I happen to own now 2 of the old historic homes in Clarkdale, and the loss of the mortar between the bricks is evident from 100 years. And I have looked at those and did some research as I looked at how I might repair those and understand exactly what Dr. Alsop's talking about, because if you use the wrong product that absorbs water differently or responds differently to temperatures and things like that, you further harm those unfired bricks. And so these are the kinds of things that we want to gather together to present to our residents. Our Historic Preservation Commission will be largely educational in nature, we think, trying to kind of bring the residents back into the idea that they are a part of an integrated community that was designed in these. Yes, they are privately owned homes, and yes, we respect those private property rights. At the same time, Clarkdale was a package. It was a package of the industrial, commercial, residential, administrative, educational structures that all worked together. And to tell this story and to keep these structures around for another 100 years, so we can keep telling the story over 100 years, and we can use that story as an asset for the town's economic development. We would like them to appreciate where their structures fit in. And so this kind of information is very valuable. And I think that, I'm sure Ruth was taking lots of notes there on that. And we will be incorporating that in the education process that we are developing, because that's largely what that body will be, the Historic Preservation Commission will be. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We have our first question from Ribu. Ribu, I believe you are working on the historic bridge project, right?
Yes, I am. All right. My question was, first of all, that was super useful. I got, getting some specifics about the bridge. So thank you, Dr. Alsop. When you were going over the issue of not letting water pool over the bricks, was that, I kind of got lost as I was furiously taking notes as you were talking. Was that applicable to the bridge or more for the those like unfired brick building structures that are downtown?
Well, I think it applies across the board. I specifically was talking about the asphalt that they had put on the road surface that raised it. And there were places in the pictures where you could see that it sort of curved down back in the corner where the parapet started. It curved downward, which allowed for water to pool there if it ever, that was an issue, which it isn't that often. But it's in Arizona, I should say. But it also applies to the unfired brick buildings. If the sidewalk slopes, say, towards the building instead of away from a building, then that allows for water to not just pool, but in the case of concrete is pretty dense. Even cement, if you were able to look at it under a microscope, it's incredibly dense. If you look at a brick, even if it's a fired brick, but particularly an unfired brick in a microscope, it's very porous. So you're going, if a sidewalk slopes towards a building, it's not only going to pool, but the brick, because it's porous, is going to take in some of that water, and then it's going to have problems. Similarly, even if the sidewalks and everything on the ground are perfect, you still, even when it rains, for example, if you have mortar, if your mortar were Portland cement, but your masonry was less strong, then what you want your building to do, or any building structure, whatever, you want all the materials to work together to uniformly take in rain or that sort of thing, and also evaporate water. And if you have a density of Portland cement that's in 320, for example, and you have an unfired brick that's 20, what's going to happen when it'll all take it, the Portland cement's going to take in less. So that means the brick is going to take in more. And then when it goes to evaporate, the brick is it's just going to keep evaporating forever, and it's going to start breaking down. So that's why you want that sort of uniformity. On the bridge, for example, the concrete, and I'd have to find out what that PSI is, but just knowing that it's white cement, and today the cement we have, which is gray in color, so I call it gray cement, the PSI of white cement is going to be far higher than unfired brick, but it is going to be lower. My guess is the white cement might be in the neighborhood of about 100, 150, which means it's going to be maybe half of the gray cement. Same issues though when it comes to water.
Okay, yeah, that was very helpful. And that also answered kind of another like point of confusion I had about like the differing strengths and why you need like materials that all have like similar densities and PSIs. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you for that. Our next question is from Jay Brenna. Am I saying your name right?
Yeah.
All right, great.
Hello, Dr. Alsop. So I have a question. So you mentioned that by expanding the bridge, we might get it will not be good because you might get kicked out of the historic preservation. So what steps would you recommend? Because by building a new bridge also, it'll be definitely expensive. What steps would you recommend? We go forward, because my team, we are part of helping out in the restoration of the Clarkdale Bridge. So yeah.
Well, as I said earlier, if you don't want to be kicked off, I think you've got a problem. That you're going to have to look elsewhere, because my concern, and that's where a engineering report assessment of the bridge would probably answer my question of what if there was a block up of some kind and there were multiple cars on the bridge. Could it handle that weight? So that's one of the early steps. And that's also why I recommended, well, if you're going to have 2 lanes, then why not a new bridge? Another alternative is to start, it definitely is a 1 lane right now. is keep it that way and add, just maybe have an additional bridge that doesn't have to be as big. And one bridge is for people, bikes, and cars in one direction, and the new one would be the opposite direction. It still means a new bridge. And so it really, I think the hardest thing is that Clarkdale, is trying so hard to respect and retain all of their historic character across the board, whether it's a historic district or on the National Register, it's everything. And so I think that it's going to be difficult for them to change the bridge, even though it means being kicked off. The commission that they're putting together certainly wouldn't approve that. That said, I do not know the time frame, and maybe one of the city folks can chime in here. I don't know what the time frame is for we really need this. I know that it's involving the tourism to the train and things like that. So if you ask them, they're probably going to say yesterday. But there are ways where if they can live with what they've got for a while, they could either make it part of tourism, and it's a one-way bridge, or they can even, if they are trying as hard as they are, there are sources where, I know it's not the answer, but there are grants out there, or there are sources of income out there where sometimes you have to match the grant or the funding source. And that is where there are plenty of solutions on the web. I can't think of one instantly where you can raise money. We did it for the state fairgrounds. And it's the sort of thing where you build the picture of how fantastic this is and how it's going to help us and everything. And that may be one way to at least overcome the matching part of a grant. And I know it doesn't quite answer your question, because I think a new bridge in part is needed. And we just don't have that instant answer.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I want to note that we have hit time. I think this conversation is going really nicely, so I'd like to propose that we keep it going for another 5 minutes or so at least.
Definitely.
I'd like to get first Clarkdale's reaction to the discussion about the bridge that we're having over here. And then I know Hada is up next, and then Aishwarya, did you have a question as well? Okay, awesome. You'll go after Hada. All right.
So it's a fascinating conversation. I had no idea that you had to have Portland cement to be concrete, but you learn something new every day. Coming from the Midwest, and being involved in historic preservation back there, I can speak firsthand to the damage that water causes to brick when the mortar surrounding it is harder than the brick itself. And I've seen lots of great buildings significantly damaged because the brick and the mortar were not properly paired. So I appreciate Dr. Alsop's insights into that. This is the first time, additionally, that I've ever worked with unfired brick. So it's a whole new set of challenges when it comes to these older buildings. With respect to the project, this is something that, of course, all things being equal, we'd have plenty of money and be able to start building a bridge as soon as you guys had, some design or plans or something for us. I think it's going to be a little bit longer range, simply because the funding for building a new bridge is going to be significant. The planning, dealing with the 404 permits and all of those things will make it a long range rather than a short range project. I don't think it's insurmountable, and I'm already in my head thinking of ways that we could possibly finance it, given the impact on our local economy and our reliance on tourism, and that being the sole means to access that railroad. So I do think there are ways that we can do that, but I am interested in hearing from the students about some of the solutions they have or some of their impressions as well.
If I could add, we have explored other alternatives to using this bridge or trying to expand this bridge. And they are pretty even more grandiose for Clarkdale, Portland Clarkdale to do. And that would actually involve another bridge further up Bitter Creek and routing traffic actually through our downtown down into the tourist traffic down, the train traffic down into the train depot and isolating this bridge off of that. So it's only used for local traffic primarily. However, the expense of that seemed so extreme that we kind of fell back on this position of, well, we have a bridge, let's just improve it. Let's just expand the bridge. And Dr. Alsop, you're bringing up, I think, something very important that I'm sure the Community Development Department has been considering, but I hadn't considered it as a council member, that we do have this bridge that's on the historic register, and we would lose that status. And what does that mean for our I guess, sense of who we are as Clarkdale in preserving our history. So it throws another wrench in the kind of the works of the limited solutions that we have. But we know we have to do something over time if we are going to develop this site of the original economic generator of Clarkdale and bring it back so that it is again integrated back into the town. It's really a very isolated area from the town. The train, 90,000 cars a year drive across that bridge to go to the train, in and out of Clarkdale, and not a lot of other reasons to stay in Clarkdale, although we're developing more of them now with a new hotel and brew pub and things like that. But other than that, that area of Clarkdale is really not integrated into the town. And so we've got to figure out how to do that. And you have helped, I think, bring clarity to a serious issue with the expansion of this bridge. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Definitely some food for thought there. And I think Ruth's comment too on the long-term perspective, probably worthwhile, right? To think about what we can do here and now, as well as what we can do down the road. I'm glad that we flagged the potential historic register drop before that happened. That would have been a bummer. So thank you, everyone. I'll turn it over to Hada for your question. And then I think, Aishwarya, we're going to make you the last question before we cut it for today. But Hada, you're in a different group, right?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you guys for taking the time to come and hold this for us. My partner actually came for the first part, and that's why I joined for the second part because of scheduling. But I appreciate your time. And my group is currently researching opportunities for energy efficiency and emissions reductions in Clarkdale. But my question really is about the historic buildings. And I know that's like a little bit, because of all the risks you mentioned about like being dropped off the register, that's a bit sensitive when it comes to what kind of techniques we can use to implement energy efficiency. And so I really wanted to know what your experience is with innovative concepts. So on the one end, there's things like green roofs, which are a bit like invasive on buildings, but anything within the spectrum of I guess really innovative energy efficiency techniques that have come across your radar that you're open to looking into, and just overall what your perception of those are. I'm curious to know.
Well, this is Mike Linsner, and I can tell you that the Clark Memorial Clubhouse was retrofitted with geothermal. heating and cooling about a decade ago through a grant. And that's probably one of the most innovative things because that building had originally been heated via steam. There was no cooling back in those days. In the 60s, somebody had retrofitted it with natural gas, which was fairly dangerous and antiquated and expensive. And so that's been, I think, quite successful for the town. I don't know if Ruth or Mike can tell us a little bit more. I know Mike has got a background in sustainability and that type of thing.
Yes, if that's an invitation, I can definitely compile some information and send that to you as a class or just you, Huda, as an individual.
Yeah, and so Huda is working with Yarisa, right? From Dr. Chetri's class.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, I think it would be fabulous if you could get some content together for them. And I think too, if I can kind of piggyback off of what Huda was talking about with like regard to particularly some of the older buildings, are there any limitations on retrofits for energy efficiency? You know, I imagine there are ways that we can and can't get into the walls and things like that. So any thoughts on that?
Nothing
So I can tell you.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Ruth.
go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry. I was just going to mention, you know, I can tell you that again, back in the Midwest, we spent a lot of time on windows and fenestration, a lot, because a lot of these older buildings, especially back there, again, like the clubhouse, were heated with steam, and a lot of them had just very simple dual pane windows, wood frames, caulk, and that was it. So looking into windows that are much more energy efficient yet meet the standard for the Secretary of Interior is important. That may be something worth looking at as well.
Another thing is to consider insulating the building. A lot of the buildings may have been insulated at the roof, but not necessarily the walls. Now, these are brick buildings. You can't touch the outside because, one, it's in a historic district. You change the character, the building gets kicked off. So what you can do is insulate from the inside, and then that also, it's not always just windows, it's the walls that absorb the heat. There's several other things. For example, in our house, which is an old house, it's coming up to, actually it's coming up to 45 years, I think. But we monitored our electric bills, our energy bills, for like a year while we planned the restoration. Then we insulated the walls and put in appropriate similar windows to what was there, and then monitored our bills again. The bills went down from, say, in the summer it might have been 300, went down to about $50. Then we put solar on the roof. And a lot of these older buildings, particularly in the downtown, they can't take a green roof because the soil it has enough weight to it that it might harm the rafters and all that. But it usually can take the framing for solar panels. When we then, and also if we had just put up the solar panels, we would have had to have probably, 50 or 60. By doing it after we insulated from the inside, not the outside, that bill that went down to 50 went down to 15, and we only needed to have maybe 10 panels. So these are all things to consider, the monitoring, as well as consider the inside. And I leave you with one other thought, and that is, if a building has been painted, okay, you cannot remove paint off of a brick. It's too porous, you'll ruin the brick. So if it's already been painted or stuccoed, you've got to retain that. If that's true, I don't recommend, if it's unpainted, leave it alone. But if it has been painted and stuccoed, that same company I mentioned earlier, Eco Safety Products, they do something called Eco Pro Coat, and it is a plant-based, very sustainable plant-based paint that it actually has chips in the paint. And when you paint it on the wall, it will actually reflect the sun off the wall. So we had on the front of the house, the two sides and the back were never painted, but on the front it was. And we repainted that with the sustainable paint. It's called solar paint. And you can touch that wall when the sun's beating on it in the summer and it doesn't hurt your hand. So there are a lot of things that you can do to historic buildings that help with the energy, but also can help them continue another 100, 200 years.
That's
So
awesome.
the house I lived in Michigan, the last house we had was a 150-year-old farmhouse. It had probably 95% of the original windows from when it was built. And historic building fanatic that I am, I would not let my husband take them out and put in new windows. So we literally had to put plastic, and it's typical back there. It is just put plastic over the windows. They now have a material, it's like a double-sided tape. You put it on the outside, you put the plastic on, and then you heat it with a blow dryer and it shrinks it up. You could, first of all, you could see the minute you take that plastic up, you could see it blowing out from the breeze from the leaky windows. And then secondly, once you got the whole house done, just that alone increased the temperature inside by 15 degrees. So it was a noticeable increase in temperature. So a lot of the things that you do for energy efficiency don't have to be super fancy or super expensive. You know, that's a trip to Home Depot, a blow dryer, some tape. I did it, anybody can do it. So they're fairly simple, like I said, and inexpensive that you can do. And that's a temporary fix. You know, spring rolls around, you pull the tape off, you pull the plastic down. And then you have automatic air conditioning because all of the breeze blows through the leaky windows.
Great, thanks for that. And thank you, Heather, for that great question. Any other thoughts on that before we take our last question? All right, hearing none. Aishwarya, and am I pronouncing your name right? I should have asked that
That's
already.
right.
Okay, all right,
Yeah,
cool. All right, go ahead.
Okay, firstly, I would want to thank you for having us. This was extremely helpful, and the confusions and thoughts we were having previously before getting here today are somewhat answered. So I just wanted to know your feedback on the things that we were brainstorming on before meeting you guys today. As Dr. Alsop said that this is a historical bridge, so we could consider making this just a bike bridge and a pedestrian bridge and keeping the historical relevance and connecting the railway and the city in a way. That was one of our initial thoughts as well. But again, I know that the bridge has to be used for traffic, and they're even looking into that. But just to know your thoughts on like keeping the bridge pedestrian, and like if we use this bridge to actually inspire the rest of the city to engage public differently in the space, or manage this as a public space for the future development. Like, what is the town's thought on this direction?
I have to apologize. I didn't understand the question. Somebody could paraphrase it for me.
Yeah, I'll paraphrase. So I'm hearing a question of like, hey, if we do go down this route of looking at the pedestrian bridge, what kind of information would be valuable? Am I paraphrasing that right?
Yeah, and also like is the town ready to go that direction? Because it is a major step away from what they actually want to do. So
Yeah, and so I'm hearing kind of questions of how would we frame that type of recommendation, being sensitive to the fact that it might not
Yeah.
actually be what you all do in the long run, but
Mhm.
might be a valuable thought exercise.
Definitely.
Well, that's what
So
this
what-
is, a thought exercise. This is what we're doing. We don't have, I don't think we have really an answer to your question because we're exploring the options that we have, given the limitation on resources that we have. So we know that, it already acts as a pedestrian bridge in a sense, or for bicycles and limited car use. There is adjacent to the bridge now, adjoining it, in one of the pictures, you could see that there is a pedestrian walkway that's old and deteriorating. So I think our motivation is good, and our motivation is to find solutions and move forward with those solutions. And we are looking for that pathway, how to do that, given the limitations that we have. And so forming the, historical preservation efforts and things like that, and getting access to grants and making sure we don't trip ourselves by changing things and then disqualify ourselves for those grants are all things that we are learning now and incorporating into this approach. But the motivation is there, the desire is there on the part of the town. I think more so than has been a long time. We are focusing on these efforts now in the town more than we had been. We have gone through a period of time where we really have been focused on the Verde River and making sure that we sustain the flows in the Verde River and incorporated that ethic into the town value system. And it's very deeply entrenched in our value system now that a flowing Verde River is very important to Clarkdale. And we are continuing those efforts. And now we are saying to ourselves, okay, now it's time to kind of focus back into historic preservation and economic development and things like that, because those are also answers. The Verde River is an economic development answer for the town of Clarkdale, and so is historic preservation. And opening up that area, the Bitter Creek industrial area, the old smelter site, is a motivation for us in our economic development efforts. So putting those all together, and because, as we're saying, our history is our story. And it's a story that we can sell, for lack of a better term, to people who are interested in in history. And we have a story of a quintessential company town in the master plan community. It's a great story to tell. And there are people who loved to learn about that and will come to visit us and spend their money, quite frankly, which gives us the sales tax revenues to begin to have money to do our part, our share of whatever grants we might be able to attain. So we are working that way, and we are committed to working that way. And we have a wonderful community development director who understands this very deeply and supports it very deeply. And we have citizens who are in our Historic Preservation Commission, on our historic, our Clarkdale Historical Society Museum, all coming together now and saying this is important for Clarkdale. This is now a value that Clarkdale needs to embrace at a higher level. And so I don't know if that answers your question. But we have the desire, and we're developing the resources, and we're very interested in what your work can do to help us, advance that. And you've already, your group has already, the ASU, the Project Cities group has already helped us advance what we can do in certain areas, economic development areas of our town. And now we're kind of saying, okay, here's another one, and it kind of keys on this bridge right here. And what do we do with this bridge? How do we make this happen and still retain that value of historic preservation? So the history of our town is it is unique, but it's also tragic in a way. I mean, this is a town that went from being, as I said in my presentation, the center of economic activity of the Verde Valley. We had the only store, we had the only theater, we had, you know, we were at our prime. And in 1953, when the smelter closed, all that began to fade away. And then when Arizona Department of Transportation came in and built the what's called the 89A bypass, which is one of our economic development corridors, traffic stopped driving through downtown Clarkdale. So we were now bypassed. That was the second hit. So the many of the retail stores that were hanging on after the close of the smelter now had even less ability to continue to survive and moved out, so that we now have so many vacant buildings. So we're trying to figure out how to counter that, how to create a new economic driver or drivers, a collection of drivers in our area, in our little town. But it means we don't have the resources. Understand that in most towns that evolve over time, you know, the community, the town government may end up owning properties and things like that. Not true in Clarkdale. Everything was owned by the company. Then it was all gone. And then we've slowly grabbed, you know, it's kind of gotten some of it back, our administrative buildings and things like that. But the town owns very little of Clarkdale. Mm-hmm. We own administrative buildings, and we own a section of land in the Bitter Creek area where we used to dispose of our effluent, you know, our treated effluent. So we are really coming up from the bootstraps, if you will, picking ourselves up by our bootstraps and trying to make this happen. So we are very eager for what you guys can bring us, and eager for solutions and also the guidance, so that we don't make mistakes along the way and destroy an important historical designation that we think is part of our story that we are here to tell and to sell. Thank you.
I have a quick question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, in reference to what Bill just said, earlier, I think it was you, Bill, mentioned that if it was a new bridge, you'd have to go way out of town or something. Is the lay of the land in any way available that you, as I said earlier, maybe the old bridge, the historic bridge, could be everything, you know, people, bikes and cars in one direction, and you could have a new one going in the other direction. Is the geography or the lay of the land there in any way possible to put in a second bridge that sort of just curves without going, you know, miles out of town?
I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to let Ruth answer that. She's nodding her head too.
I have to unmute first. No, definitely. I think that's a possibility to build another bridge and limit the old one to pedestrian and bike use. There are many places that we could do something like that. Oh, okay. Again, okay. Yeah, it's just, you know, bridges aren't cheap.
Yeah, right.
And this is
sorry. So what I guess to go back to the question and maybe Ruth, I know we got a lot from Councilmember Regner on this, but maybe just checking with you if there are any final thoughts on it, because we do need to close up, unfortunately.
Sure.
Just do you have any additional thoughts on maybe operationalizing kind of what the students could provide you of value in exploring the options for a second bridge? Like if they were to propose that, what kind of information would help you to make an informed decision?
So I think that the biggest, I think that is a recommendation worth considering, definitely. And I think that the things to look at is obviously where that bridge would go along Bitter Creek, considering the topographical constraints. You know, the town is quite hilly, and there's quite a bit of there are a number of draws and creek beds like this that we need to bridge. So I think looking at things like that, and then again, looking at costs, you know, I know it's hard to estimate construction costs, but, you know, some ballpark of how much. And I think those are the big factors, really. You know, this bridge is not so far gone that it's not worth preserving. I don't think demolition and replacing it would be justified at all. It certainly continues to carry its weight and function just fine, other than the fact that it's a one-way bridge. But I think that consideration of limiting this to pedestrian and bicycles, and then a new two-lane bridge would certainly be a good plan, both with respect to the tourism aspect and you know, any kind of industry that we might be able to land in the industrial park. You'd be talking about much bigger vehicles going back and forth. So definitely look into that.
Well, fantastic. I know this conversation has been great. We have organically gone about 30 minutes over time. So I want to thank everyone so much for your time and for sticking around. I am super grateful to Dr. Alsop for hopping in to provide your expertise, for Ruth and your team, Councilmember Regner, and the team from the Clarkdale Historic Society. Thank you, Michael and Cindy, for tuning in there. Pleasure having you all. I guess I'll give our panelists an opportunity for brief final thoughts before we close it out, and then we'll go ahead and get on to whatever's next.
We love this relationship with ASU and the Project Cities program, and it's been very valuable to us, and we continue to see its value and potential for us as we envision our future and move towards our future. We are incorporating the previous reports that were submitted to us into our general plan update. We didn't even have to like create a new section. We're just going to use this. Awesome. We're going to attach this because it says exactly what we wanted. And some of us were going, this is what we thought, and it was so reaffirming that we just went, okay, there's no reason to rewrite this. Let's just plug it in. So that's how good you guys are. And that's how much we appreciate you. And we hope to continue doing that. Okay. And that's from a Wildcat, by the way. So.
We forget. Well, thank you so much. I'm definitely going to need to follow up with you for more details on how that report is being used for the general plan. I'm so glad to hear that it was useful for you.
Oh,
and hopefully the semester will be
very reaffirming. So
great. Congratulations to Clarkdale for appreciating their history and their building's characters, and stay away from Portland cement.
We have a cement plant here that right next to us because of the source of lime in the area. So that's another thing you would find interesting, Dr. Alsop, is we have those bricks are all made with local materials, we believe. The lime is mined here and the clay came from the Verde River right here. So another interesting story.
Keep it up.
What a cool community.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, guys. I got to jump out. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, students. Take care.
Thank you, students.